What if I told you that a woman could get a restraining order, move across town, change her phone number, and still end up dead in her own kitchen? And the man who killed her would never face trial because he wrote one letter claiming it was all about love. This is the story that's been eating at me for months, and honestly, it should be eating at you too, because if this can happen to someone like Catherine Reynolds, it can happen to anyone. Before we dive in, if stories like this matter to you, if you believe every victim deserves justice, hit that subscribe button right now. We're building a community of people who refuse to let these cases be forgotten, and your support literally helps us investigate more stories like Catherine's. Catherine Reynolds was already smiling at 6 a.m., somehow genuinely happy to see every customer who walked through the doors of Sweet Dreams Bakery on Vine Street. She wasn't just running a business, she was creating something magical in that little corner shop. Former customers still talk about how she remembered everyone's orders, how she'd slip an extra cookie to kids, how she stayed late to make wedding cakes for couples who couldn't afford fancy prices. She had this laugh that could fill the entire bakery, and she used it often. But here's what gets me, and tell me if this doesn't bother you too. Catherine was living a double life that none of her customers knew about. While she was spreading joy 8 hours a day, she was going home to a nightmare. For 2 years, Catherine had been trying to escape her ex-boyfriend, Marcus Thompson. And I mean trying everything. She'd moved apartments 3 times, changed her number twice, even considered leaving Cincinnati entirely. This woman who'd built her dream business from nothing was ready to abandon everything just to feel safe. Quick question for those listening. Have you ever felt unsafe in your own home? Drop a comment and let me know, because Catherine's story might feel painfully familiar. The restraining order she filed in September 2022 painted a terrifying reality. Marcus had been showing up at her bakery, following her home, sending hundreds of text messages daily. The court documents describe him sitting in his car outside her apartment for hours, just watching. Catherine told her sister Jennifer, "I feel like I'm being hunted." Think about that phrase for a second. Hunted, like an animal. Here's what we know happened on that Tuesday morning, and trust me, every detail matters. Catherine opened Sweet Dreams at 5:30 a.m. just like always. Her first customer, Mrs. Patricia Wilson, came in at 6:15 for her usual coffee and blueberry muffin. They chatted about Patricia's grandson's upcoming birthday party. Catherine was excited. She was making the cake. She seemed perfectly normal, Patricia told police later. Happy, energetic. We were laughing about her secret ingredient in the cupcakes. At 11:47 a.m., Catherine sent her last text message to her sister. "Busy day, love you too." At 2:30 p.m., she closed the bakery early. This never happened. Catherine would rather work with a fever than disappoint a customer expecting fresh bread. Her neighbor, Robert Hayes, saw her arrive home at 2:45 p.m. She waved at him like always. 20 minutes later, he heard what he described as firecrackers coming from her apartment. But here's where it gets sickening, and I need you to really hear this part. Robert didn't call police for 45 minutes because, and I quote, "I didn't want to bother anyone over some noise." 45 minutes. Let me ask you something. If you heard what sounded like gunshots from your neighbor's apartment, how long would you wait to call 911? Because I'm thinking Robert's delay might have cost Catherine any chance of survival. When police finally arrived at 3:50 p.m., they found Catherine Reynolds dead in her kitchen, 3 gunshot wounds, and Marcus Thompson was gone. Now here's where this case goes from tragic to absolutely infuriating, and I guarantee this next part is going to make your blood boil. Marcus Thompson was found dead in his car 2 miles away, apparently from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Classic murder-suicide, right? Case closed? Not so fast. Tucked under his body was a handwritten letter. 4 pages of rambling text that Marcus's defense attorney, yes, even dead men apparently need lawyers, claimed proved this was a crime of passion rather than premeditated murder. The letter talked about their eternal love and how they were meant to be together forever. It described how Marcus couldn't live without Catherine and how he was freeing them both from this pain. Detective Sarah Mitchell, the lead investigator, told reporters the letter was clearly the writings of a disturbed individual attempting to justify the unjustifiable. But here's the kicker. Marcus's family hired a private attorney who argued that because Marcus was dead, the case should be classified as a murder-suicide with mitigating emotional circumstances. What does that even mean? It means they wanted Catherine's murder treated as something less than cold-blooded killing. I want you to think about this. Should a killer's death absolve them of responsibility? Should a love letter excuse murder? Drop your thoughts in the comments because this legal loophole is being used across the country. And now we get to the part of this story that'll keep you up at night thinking about all the ways our system failed Catherine Reynolds. The Cincinnati Police Department spent exactly 16 days investigating Catherine's murder before officially closing the case. 16 days. Want to know what they didn't investigate? They never searched Marcus's apartment, even though his lease didn't expire until December. His landlord eventually threw out everything, including what might have been evidence of premeditation. They never interviewed Marcus's co-workers, who later told local news that he'd been acting strange for weeks and had asked for time off on November 15th, the exact day Catherine died. They never examined his phone records to see if he'd been tracking Catherine's location through apps or social media. They never questioned why Marcus knew Catherine would be home early that day when she'd never closed the bakery early before. Most disturbing of all, they never investigated the restraining order violations. Catherine had called police 4 times in October, reporting that Marcus was violating the court order. 4 times. Each call was logged, each report was filed, and absolutely nothing was done. Detective Mitchell later admitted, "We were treating it as domestic issues rather than stalking behaviors that could escalate to violence." What do you think? Should police be held accountable when they ignore restraining order violations that lead to murder? Because Catherine's family sure think so. Catherine's sister, Jennifer Reynolds Morrison, has become the voice for her sister's memory. And honestly, she's not going to let anyone forget what happened. "My sister followed every rule," Jennifer told me during our phone interview. "She got the restraining order. She changed apartments. She reported violations. She did everything she was supposed to do, and the system failed her completely." Jennifer has spent the last 2 years fighting for what she calls Catherine's Law, legislation that would require police to investigate restraining order violations within 24 hours and mandate GPS monitoring for repeat violators. But here's what really gets me about Jennifer's fight. She's not just seeking justice for Catherine, she's trying to save other women who might be living the same nightmare her sister lived. "I get emails every week from women telling me they're in the same situation Catherine was in," Jennifer explains. "They have restraining orders that aren't being enforced. They're being stalked and harassed, and police are treating it like a minor annoyance instead of a life-threatening situation." The family hired private investigator Thomas Baker to review the case. What he found should horrify anyone who believes in justice. Marcus had been arrested twice for domestic violence with previous girlfriends, charges that were dropped when the women moved away or stopped cooperating. He had a pattern of escalating behavior that was well documented, but apparently invisible to the system that was supposed to protect Catherine. "This wasn't a crime of passion," Baker concluded. "This was the inevitable result of a system that treats women's safety as optional." Remember how I said this case should keep you up at night? Well, buckle up, because the evidence that everyone ignored is going to make you question everything you thought you knew about how these investigations work. Security footage from the convenience store across from Catherine's apartment complex shows Marcus's car circling the parking lot for 3 hours before Catherine came home. 3 hours. He wasn't there because of sudden passion. He was lying in wait. The store clerk, Maria Santos, remembers Marcus coming in twice that afternoon to buy energy drinks and cigarettes. "He kept looking out the window," she told police. "I thought he was waiting for someone." Marcus's credit card records show he purchased zip ties and duct tape from a hardware store 2 days before the murder. When Jennifer Reynolds Morrison brought this to police attention, they claimed it was circumstantial and could have been for home repairs. Zip ties and duct tape for home repairs. Let that sink in. What do you think zip ties and duct tape were really for? And why do you think police dismissed evidence that seems pretty obvious to the rest of us? Catherine's phone was found smashed in her kitchen, but police never attempted to recover data from it. The technology existed in 2022 to retrieve information from damaged phones, but CPD claimed they didn't have the budget for expensive forensic analysis. The most chilling evidence: Catherine's diary, found in her bedroom, contained entries from the week before her death describing nightmares about Marcus finding her and killing her. "I wake up in cold sweats," she wrote on November 10th. "I dream about him standing over my bed, and I can't scream for help." 5 days later, she was dead. Based on evidence that police chose to ignore, here's what actually happened on November 15th, 2022. Marcus took the day off work and began surveilling Catherine's bakery at dawn. He knew her routines better than anyone: when she arrived, when she had her busiest periods, when she typically went home. At some point that morning, Marcus called the bakery pretending to be a vendor with an urgent delivery issue. The call logs show a 3-minute conversation at 11:30 a.m., just 17 minutes before Catherine sent her last text message. During that call, Marcus likely convinced Catherine she needed to close early to handle some kind of business emergency. She was trusting, caring, exactly the kind of person who would rush to help solve a problem. Marcus positioned himself at Catherine's apartment complex by noon, giving himself plenty of time to prepare. The zip ties and duct tape suggest he planned to restrain her, possibly to force some kind of conversation or confession of love. But something went wrong. Maybe Catherine fought back harder than he expected. Maybe she threatened to call police. Maybe she told him she could never love him. The gunshots occurred around 3:05 p.m. according to ballistics analysis, not 3:30 when neighbor Robert Hayes reported hearing them. This means Marcus spent nearly 20 minutes in that apartment after killing Catherine. 20 minutes. What was he doing for 20 minutes? The suicide letter was written on paper that matched Catherine's kitchen notepad. Marcus wrote his love letter in her apartment, using her supplies, while sitting next to her body. Does that sound like passion to you? Or does it sound like calculated cruelty? Now, here's where this story gets really dark, and I need you to pay attention because this affects all of us. 6 months after Catherine's murder, Detective Sarah Mitchell was promoted to captain. The same detective who spent exactly 16 days investigating before closing the case received a promotion. When Jennifer Reynolds Morrison filed a complaint about the investigation, she was told that personnel decisions are not subject to public review and that the case was resolved according to department standards. The Cincinnati Police Department has since implemented what they call enhanced domestic violence protocols, but they refuse to acknowledge that Catherine's case was mishandled. More troubling? 3 other murder-suicides involving restraining order violations have occurred in Cincinnati since Catherine's death. 3 more women who followed the rules, trusted the system, and ended up dead. The pattern is identical: restraining orders, violations that go uninvestigated, escalating behavior that's dismissed as domestic disputes, and families left with no answers and no accountability. How many more women have to die before we admit the system is broken? And why are we protecting the reputations of investigators more than we're protecting victims? Here's what's happening right now as we speak. Jennifer Reynolds Morrison has filed a federal civil rights lawsuit against the Cincinnati Police Department, claiming they violated Catherine's constitutional right to equal protection under the law. The lawsuit alleges that CPD has a pattern of treating domestic violence cases involving women differently than other violent crimes, resulting in inadequate investigations and preventable deaths. Private investigator Thomas Baker is still actively working the case, funded by donations from people who believe Catherine deserves better. He's discovered evidence that Marcus may have been stalking other women before targeting Catherine, evidence that could have saved her life if police had done their job. Most importantly, Catherine's story has inspired domestic violence advocates across the country to push for legislative changes that would make restraining orders actually meaningful. If you want to help make sure no other woman suffers Catherine's fate, tell me in the comments. What changes do you think need to happen? What would you do differently if you were in charge? 3 years later, we still don't have answers to the most basic questions about Catherine Reynolds' murder. Why did police ignore 4 separate restraining order violations in the month before her death? Why was Marcus Thompson able to purchase a gun despite having 2 domestic violence arrests on his record? Why did it take the neighbor 45 minutes to call police after hearing gunshots? Why were obvious pieces of evidence, phone records, apartment searches, witness interviews, simply skipped? Why was the case closed in 16 days when the average murder investigation takes months? And most importantly, how many other Catherine Reynolds are out there right now, living in fear while the system that's supposed to protect them treats their safety as optional? I want to hear from you. Which of these questions bothers you most? And do you think we'll ever get real answers? The search for complete justice continues, and you can be part of making sure Catherine's death wasn't meaningless. If you're moved by stories like this, stories of women who trusted the system and paid with their lives, families who refuse to give up fighting for justice, and the belief that every victim deserves thorough investigation, then you're exactly where you belong. Hit that like button if this story made you angry at how our system fails victims and their families. And listen, if you're not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Every single week, we dive deep into cases where justice was denied, stories that expose system failures, and mysteries that demand answers. Your subscription helps us investigate more cases, support more families, and fight for changes that could save lives. Subscribe right now and join our growing community of people who refuse to let these cases disappear into forgotten police files. Hit that notification bell because you won't want to miss what we uncover next. Some of these system failures will absolutely shock you. Share this with someone who needs to hear Catherine's story, someone who might be living in fear right now, someone who needs to know they're not alone. What detail in Catherine's case bothered you the most? What do you think police should have done differently? How do we make sure this never happens to another woman? Let us know in the comments below. Your voice matters in this fight for justice. If you have information about domestic violence resources in your area, or if you're working to change laws that protect stalking victims, share that information in the comments. Together, we can build a network of people who actually care about keeping women safe. Catherine Reynolds deserved better. Every woman deserves better, and we're not going to stop fighting until the system actually protects the people it's supposed to serve. The search for complete justice continues and hope never dies.